Why did 30 by 30 fail? Is Singapore food secure? What happened to vertical farms? Why is local food so expensive? Will we run out of chicken rice again? These aren't random questions. They're symptoms of a bigger story, a story about a small island trying to outsmart global chaos and losing the race against time. In 2019, Singapore launched one of its most ambitious national projects: grow 30% of the nation's food locally by 2030, a moonshot born from climate anxiety, global uncertainty, and the fear that one day imports might stop. 6 years later, in November 2025, the government quietly scrapped the plan. Today, we break down the 7 real reasons why Singapore's boldest food security experiment collapsed and why the world should pay attention. Because if Singapore couldn't pull this off, who can? For decades, Singapore's food strategy was simple. Don't grow it, buy it. Buy from 170 countries. Diversify sources. Stockpile the basics. Keep everything moving. It worked brilliantly. So brilliantly that by 2019, Singapore didn't grow much food at all. Farming was pushed to the fringes, squeezed into 1% of the land. Agriculture became a rounding error in GDP. But then climate change changed the game. Crop yields were projected to fall. Global supply chains were becoming fragile. Importing everything suddenly felt risky. So Singapore tried to reverse 40 years of policy and build a high-tech agricultural sector, almost from scratch. The intention was right. The timing was terrible. Reason number 1, the tiny island problem. Singapore's food ambitions didn't fail because the idea was bad. They failed because the island is still living with the consequences of a decision made half a century ago. When Singapore became independent in 1965, it was still a farming society. 22% of the island was farmland. More than 20,000 family farms operated here, and the country grew 60% of its own food. Yes, Singapore once produced 100% of its pork, poultry, and eggs, but rapid industrialization changed everything. In the 1970s and 80s, Singapore made a national decision. Farming would lose to factories. Infrastructure, housing, industrial parks, airports, all of it needed land. And Singapore only has one resource scarcer than oil: space. By 1980, vegetable farmland had collapsed to 267 hectares. By the 2000s, agriculture barely survived on 1% of Singapore's land. Small pockets in Lim Chu Kang, Sungai Tengah, and Mandai. All of it fragmented, aging, and pushed to the edges. This wasn't an accident. It was policy. Singapore's leaders openly argued that eliminating agriculture could boost GDP because farmland wasn't as productive as industries. And they weren't wrong. Economically, it worked. But it created a structural trap. So when Singapore suddenly announced the 30 by 30 plan in 2019, they were trying to rebuild a farming sector that had been intentionally dismantled for 40 years. No country goes from 1% agriculture to 30% local nutrition without paying a massive price. You can build servers in towers. You can build apartments in towers. But farming? Farming doesn't scale vertically without enormous support, and here's where the problem began. By the time Singapore realized it needed local food again, the land was gone, the farms were gone, the farmers were gone, and the economics had entirely changed. 30 by 30 wasn't born into a blank slate. It was born into decades of structural limitations, and the policy never escaped that gravity. Reason 2, the cost problem nobody wanted to admit. Singapore's farming dream wasn't defeated by technology. It was defeated by math. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Singaporeans were searching for, but no one said out loud, local food is too expensive. Not because farmers are greedy, but because Singapore is one of the most expensive places on Earth to produce anything. Start with land. A farm in Malaysia or Thailand pays a fraction of what a Singapore farm pays in rent. In Singapore, land isn't just expensive. It's competing with housing. Data centers, warehouses, schools, even military training. When land is scarce, every square meter must fight for justification. And farms simply couldn't win the bidding war. Then came electricity. Vertical farms run on lights, pumps, cooling systems, grow towers. Basically, they're mini data centers pretending to be farms. In 2023 and 2024, global energy prices spiked. Singapore's farming startups suddenly realized a brutal fact. The cost of electricity alone made their vegetables more expensive than imports from 3,000 kilometers away. Next problem, workforce cost. You don't just hire any worker for these ultra-controlled environments. You need biologists, technicians, engineers, and food science experts. Great talent, high salaries, small margins. The math was never going to end well. At some point, farms began doing the Singapore calculation every startup secretly does. Can we scale? Or are we just an expensive science experiment? Most chose to shut down. Others pivoted. A few survived, but only by charging premium prices that most Singaporeans wouldn't pay, especially when imported vegetables still cost less. This wasn't a failure of ambition. It was a failure of economics. Because no matter how futuristic the farming, Singapore couldn't make local food cheaper than global supply chains that have spent 50 years optimizing themselves. Section 3, Reason 3. The science worked. The scale didn't. This is the part most people misunderstand. Singapore didn't fail because the tech was bad. In fact, the tech worked incredibly well, more efficiently than traditional farms, more predictably than weather, and more hygienically than anything outdoors. The real problem, scaling it to a national level, was practically impossible. Vertical farms are amazing when you're feeding a supermarket chain, a few restaurants, a neighborhood. But an entire country? That's a different universe. To feed 6 million people, Singapore would need massive land allocations, industrial-scale vertical farms, a logistics network to match, a stable, low-cost energy source, and billions of dollars in ongoing subsidies. What Singapore built instead was a collection of high-tech islands, dozens of farms that were great at proving a point, but not great at producing volume. They could produce microgreens, lettuce, leafy vegetables, but not rice, wheat, beef, dairy, onions, potatoes, or the ingredients of chicken rice. Let's be honest. So even if Singapore built 10 times more vertical farms, they would still only be covering a thin slice of the national diet. The tech wasn't wrong. The target was. Singapore tried to use precision-controlled labs to solve a food problem that demands massive land-based agriculture. It's like trying to power a city with laptop batteries. Smart, but not scalable. Section 4, Reason 4. Climate shock after climate shock. This is the reason Singaporeans feel the fear most, because they lived through it. Over the last 5 years, the world has been hit by droughts, floods, heat waves, crop failures, export bans, geopolitical food blockages. Every time something happened globally, Singapore felt the ripple. When India restricted rice exports, Singaporean families panicked. When Malaysia froze chicken exports, chicken rice stores shut down overnight. When climate wiped out vegetable farms in northern Australia, prices spiked across Southeast Asia. Singapore wasn't just reacting to climate shocks, it was absorbing them. And here's the paradox that killed 30 by 30. The more unpredictable the world became, the harder it was for Singapore's local farms to survive. Because insurance costs went up, import-dependent equipment got delayed, feed became more expensive, electricity fluctuated, operating costs skyrocketed. Singapore wanted to build a stable local food system, right when the entire global food system was becoming unstable. It wasn't fertile ground for a moonshot project. It was a storm, and the farms, especially the small ones, didn't stand a chance. Section 5, Reason 5. Singaporeans didn't buy local food. This is the part that hurts the most, because it wasn't about policy, tech, or weather. It was about consumer behavior. Singapore's entire 30 by 30 plan depended on one assumption. If we grow more food locally, Singaporeans will buy it. But that didn't happen. Local produce, whether from vertical farms, rooftop farms, or hydroponics, entered a brutally competitive marketplace where Malaysian vegetables were cheaper, Australian imports had stronger branding, and consumers trusted imported more than experimental local. Even when local food was fresher, cleaner, and safer, most people picked the cheaper option. And Singaporeans weren't wrong. They were responding to rising cost of living, rising grocery prices, a shrinking middle-class budget. When faced with 240 imported kailan versus 480 locally farmed kailan. The choice wasn't emotional. It was economic. The government tried labels like SG fresh produce, but labels couldn't fix a structural truth. Local farms produced premium products for a population that didn't want to pay premium prices, so shelves stayed stocked, margins collapsed, and one by one farms shut down because nobody was buying enough to keep them alive. The market spoke and it said, "We like local food, but not at this price." Section 6. Reason 6. A system built for innovation, not survival. Singapore is amazing at launching things. Fast, efficient, optimistic. It's what makes the country a global testbed for futuristic ideas. But maintaining those ideas, scaling them, making them financially bulletproof for decades, that's a different skill set. The 30 by 30 project wasn't built on a slow, steady agricultural foundation. It was built on the startup model. Innovate fast. Move fast. Build prototypes. Launch pilot projects. Raise investor money. Show beautiful results. Pray the economics work later. This works for apps. It does not work for food security. Food is slow, repetitive, and unforgiving. It doesn't care about startup vibes. It punishes high energy costs, high land costs, disruptions, expensive labor, unpredictable markets. Singapore built a system optimized for innovation, not for long-term agricultural survival. Vertical farms had tech, but they didn't have safety nets, price stabilization, long-term state guarantees, subsidies like traditional farmers receive in Europe or the US, multi-decade commitments. They were expected to compete in the free market while carrying science lab overheads. It was like asking a Formula One car to win a marathon. So when shocks came, inflation, supply chain chaos, rising rent, the entire ecosystem cracked. Because the system wasn't designed to endure stress. It was designed to impress. Section 7. Reason 7. Global supply chains got too good. This is the twist nobody expected. Singapore's local farming didn't collapse because global imports failed. It collapsed because global imports became too efficient, too cheap and too reliable, even during chaos. For decades, Singapore invested heavily in trade relationships, cold chain logistics, shipping networks, bilateral food agreements, diversified import sources. The result? A global supply chain so optimized that even with oil shocks, wars, export bans, and climate disasters, Singapore almost never ran out of food. Prices jumped, yes, but shelves stayed full. And that created the final paradox. Why build expensive farms when the world keeps delivering food faster, cheaper, and more reliably than you can grow at home? The world got better at feeding Singapore, faster than Singapore got better at feeding itself. And the 30 by 30 dream, moonshot born out of fear, couldn't compete with a global system engineered for efficiency. In the end, Singapore was outperformed not by its failures, but by the world's success. Conclusion. The real lesson of 30 by 30. Singapore didn't fail. It recalibrated. The 30 by 30 project wasn't a waste. It was a stress test that revealed something important about the modern world. Even the richest, most advanced city-state on Earth cannot fully escape global interdependence. Food security isn't just technology, nationalism, or growing your own food. It's a mix of smart imports, logistics, diplomacy, diversification, strategic reserves, and targeted local production. Singapore learned that local farms can support resilience, but they cannot replace global supply chains. So the country shifted strategy. More cold storage reserves, more bilateral agreements, more regional diversification, more flexible import routes, and local production only where it makes economic sense. This is not a retreat. It's a recognition of global reality. Because if a perfectly run city like Singapore can't sustainably grow 30% of its own food, then maybe the future of food security isn't going back to the land. Maybe it's building a world where connections, not isolation, save us. The 30 by 30 story isn't a failure. It's a warning and a roadmap. And every country should be paying attention.